Hi guys, welcome back from Pax Europiana, this way on the way to Tirana, to the capital of Albania, on my way back. This is now, I think, focused. I will talk about these infrastructure issues. Road infrastructure, waste infrastructure, but also the question of land. It's my favorite topic and you can see where the problems are. I want to show you in my channel the real life in Albania. Here in this tour, and the part of the NATO tour, I want to explain you where the huge potential is and the luxury properties and the segment of the future, but also the real issues of the people as they live here. Here, for example, public transport, how it's organized, the wastewater system here, and this is one of the biggest actually construction companies. This is one of the Salieri is one of the oligarchs, I didn't know, but it's one of the big things. His property was very well organized, next to it not so much. And here we are basically at one of the side roads, and you can easily see where the real problem is. And the problem is, and it's not a surprise for all of you who listen to me, that the land issue was not properly regulated back then. The land issue, I mean the ownership and the registration issue. This should have done quite now from the settlement of 95 onwards. It should have been done properly. And it's not that we didn't know in Europe how to do that. Yeah? We had the land register in Austria and Germany and in most of Europe, but there was never the kind of unity and the kind of clarity to help the transition countries to overcome the issues of land ownership. Because in the EU it's not a topic and we don't have a legal base, and then it's very complicated, and most of the international people working on such things, they think that's a very boring issue, and most of the listeners also for me, they think that land is boring, it doesn't move, what it is about. But land is very fundamental. Land is for agriculture, obvious, for infrastructure, for residential building. Land is tourism development. Land is development of companies. Land is basically the most important resource next to people in a nation, and land can be transferred also into transformed into capital if there is working institutions. Otherwise it's worthless land. And you can grow something on it, but even that doesn't work very well when it's not clear who owns what. So land is really the most important, and the question of governance of land is so important for the development of a country. And in no country, to my best knowledge, it went so badly after the end of communism like in Albania. This is very much connected with the communist past, but also with this botched transition in the 90s. And then it led also to one of the reasons why all these problems with the pyramid schemes happened. Yeah? Because what happened, you were not really significantly, seriously possible to invest in land, because normally land sucks up all the excess capital. You know, excess capital, I mean additional money is coming in from diaspora, from investors, from funders, and there was a lot of money coming in, and normally this is then available for a short moment only, because it's sucked up then in the property market. But when you don't have a working property market and not a good system of doing that, then obviously that leads to money floating around, then you have speculative funds, and then you have this whole mess coming up. Additionally, in no other country in Europe, to my best knowledge, you have over 10,000 people dying from property-related conflicts in the transition. That's the estimated number of conflicts related to property borders and issues connected with land property. I'm not talking about stealing things. That's happening everywhere. There are some people who do that. No, I'm talking, also land can be stolen, by the way. There's a lot of manipulation in the land cadastre as well by the political elite and the ones who can buy the access. But what I'm talking about is the issue of land basically being unavailable for investment capital because of the lack of registration, and that's the one thing. And the other is then that the borders were unclear, the ownership was unclear, and then a lot of conflicts happened tragically. And the economically fundamental reason for the problem is the issue of the land rights. And that is basically the reason why the ex-Yugoslavian states, despite the wars, because in Albania, in a sense, there was no war. There was a civil unrest, in 97. There were the consequences of the 99 war in Kosovo, but there was no war. You know, there was no external enemy. There was no fight in Albania during the transition. But there was obviously, like it was in Yugoslavia, but still the ex-Yugoslavian states had property rights. Here's the big difference. And the other Soviet Union countries, they have regulated partly better. It's just a very specific problem of Albania that this issue of this unclarity in the property rights was left for so long open, like a bleeding wound. And then when you don't have a firm fundament for the economic decisions, for the investment decisions of companies, for the production decisions for foreign investors, you end up in this ultimate mess in which to some extent we are still today. Because still today in 2021 the issue of land rights is not ultimately settled like it is conclusively in Montenegro, in Macedonia, and to a high extent also, despite many open issues and lack of progress, but even in Kosovo it's relatively clearly settled. Yeah? And there could be better results, but in no other country to this day still this is a big issue. That's why I recommend foreign investors to buy only from developers, because that's basically your security. It's the developer who has to deal with the land rights, and you buy from him newly produced apartments basically, or houses on his land, so you are safe. And that's basically one of the reasons. But this has a lot of consequences. It has the consequence and the massive consequences in all aspects. One of the aspects is of course a lot of injustice. When it came to the 92, when the law was done to return property as a compensation for communist injustice, then this was done very complicated way. Everybody got a little bit of land, but it was not in his inherited land, because there was often maybe no records, but there was no will for real restitution. So there was this kind of, as in Ukraine was done as well, this kind of small pieces of the kolkhozes were given to the workers, basically as a kind of compensation for their past expropriation. So this was very unfortunate. The Bulgarians did it much better, and that was leading to many property conflicts also later, because this was done very hasty, very unclear borders, and led to a lot of problems. Also today, it still leads to a lot of problems with the investment of foreign companies in infrastructure areas. For example, in the rural areas where the big infrastructure projects were done, in the central southern districts around Berat, where the Trans-Adriatic pipeline or the big hydropower of the Norwegians was done, it was very complicated to assess the ownership and to have conclusive data, and you need that also for compensation purposes. And you need that also for clarity of investment. That's what international investors need, because they do things properly, and then it works, yeah? And then it's conclusively done forever. And then it's nice. And then the people get compensated and it works. Today we still have a lot of decisions of the government of Albania where expropriation of property is done very brutal, hard, against the will of the people. No consent asked. Yeah? Of course you can say there is a higher issue that must be addressed. Yeah? That's of course in every legislation we have that for building major infrastructure projects or others. But the way this is done here, with minimal compensation, no compensation at all, or kind of basically imposing the decisions in very arbitrary manner on the landowners, which by now they have established this system of land ownership, and then you take it away again in a very brutal manner. Oh, it's very bad, yeah. And this is obviously also, you can see it in the property area, you can see it in the area of justice, in the area of infrastructure, everywhere where the land rights are not conclusively clear, and the process of taking away or gaining property title are not very well done, or often unfortunately manipulated. There's also, because the state was evaporating twice here, in 91 the communist state, that was good, in 97 the reformed new democracy, that was very bad, and it was taking a long time after 2000 to rebuild it gradually. There is a big tradition of manipulation of the court and cadastre data. whenever these institutions were built up. But when you know enough and you are powerful enough, you have all the possibilities to manipulate the data, because there is no kind of commonly visible, clear, established online system to this moment. And that's of course really a tragedy for a country, when then the powerful can collude with the courts and then establish new ownership without purchase, but basically just seeing empty land somewhere and appropriating it with all clean super papers, but no money, but this kind of internal payments for everybody to produce the papers, and then they suddenly have collected a lot of land against the will of the owner. And that's of course a tragedy. And when you look, for example, at the status of the Albanian agriculture, or also of many of the abandoned buildings you see, that's a clear sign when the property rights are not working in a nation, because it's not really clear who is belonging what, where's the borders, and then you have nobody cares then. Why should you invest in a piece of land where you're not sure that this will belong to? Or you have also, and that's a side effect of that one, you basically then live somewhere, you think it's yours, you then have the issue that you basically have been living there for generations, yeah? So you think that's all totally fine, and you then build there and you find out, no, it's no longer yours. And you also have the issue that a lot of people live in this kind of land informality, and then they start to build, obviously, they take some money, they have some remittances, and they build informal settlements on this informally land, which they are in all kind of reasonable assessment that's yours and that's theirs, and then somebody says, no, but you built it illegally. It was not informally, but illegally. And then comes the construction police and destroys it. I mean, that's also a totally outrageous way to do things in a European economy, that you say, for example, yeah, that's informal because it has no papers, I have the right to destroy it. Man, the normal way is to legalize it. That means that you then assess what was the situation, what is wrong, he has to rectify it, to change it, to improve it, but not come with the heavy machinery and destroy the investments of the people. This is what is happening here at an unprecedented level. I think Albania, I mean, the final assessment nobody can make, but when they have built now many hundreds of millions of square meters in the last 30 years since the end of communism, basically there was very little building and sustainable building done before. In the 40 years of communism it was a complete lack of investment. And then you have built many millions, but at the same time certainly half of it was destroyed in the meantime. I mean, you don't wonder that Albania is not better developed, because when you first build a lot and at the same time you build it on informal ownership rights and informal, and it's not illegal construction, it's informal construction, then you do that, and the result is obviously that you then destroy it later by the force of law at the cost of the taxpayers. And this is a complete mess, obviously. And there are hundreds and if not millions of square meters of which were destroyed, especially Rama, but also Berisha. Most of it and many of it was of course in the as political revenge act. Yeah. And that's the way it works. When you talk too much, or you're in the wrong party, or you say something the politics don't like, and then your property is illegal, and it's not informal. There's a big difference here. It's not only informal but illegal, and it must be destroyed. And then you can just watch as the construction police, with the help of the state police, comes and demolishes the house of your parents. I mean, this is outrageous. This is really very terrible. And it's all rooted in the basic problem of the transition of Albania and the lack of help from the start. We should have helped much more from the beginning and also imposed the European legal order from the start. But for that, obviously, everybody says I'm imperialist, but it would have been much better to say, this is the European cadastre, this is the way it's done, we help you, we will do it. But again, nobody is really ready, because the first priority of the international community is always elections and somehow external security, for some good reason as well. but land rights are always complicated and boring. But it's the ultimate reason behind the lack of progress, and also the situation that much things still look quite shabby and quite bad, because when nobody owns it, nobody really cares, and so there's no investment in it, and so it's left like that. Additionally, when it comes to the big issue of the dirt in the street, because Albania, contrary to all other countries in Southeastern Europe, has a big issue obviously with the situation of waste collection. This is to this day a major problem in this country, and you have seen it. I made several videos about it. And then of course the international community wants to help, and they do a lot of things like building new ways, the whole kind of cycle of things, you know, buying new containers, very important, training the staff, very important. Also, in some cases there is public-private partnerships to help in that one and invest in that one, in the waste collection cycle. There's also new landfills, there's talk about the waste incineration plants, and so that's all technically very important things, and I don't want to diminish it. But the most important, and there's also a lot of campaign to let's clean Albania, to change the mentality and clean up things, but the underlying problem is not addressed. And again, also in the waste, and also I will talk about the water, but in all these issues, the underlying issue is that the property rights cadastre is not developed. I explain why. Because how it works, for example, in Austria, is that property taxes and property related service costs, like for example waste collection, are attached to the ownership rights via the ownership cadastre. That means everybody who owns anything in Austria is registered, and it's everywhere else in the world, to my best knowledge, similar. But in Austria we have the most consistent system which works similarly in all countries which were part of the Austrian-Hungarian legal system to some extent, and it's a very well working system. I like it the best. Yeah? So how it works? You have property rights, attached to it you have also obligations, like for example paying your mortgage in case you have bought it with the help of a bank, but also you have to pay your property taxes, but also you have to pay property related services. In the case of apartments, and that's all done by administration. In the case of houses, that's also then directly done of the house and landowner with its municipality. But then it's very clear. You have a house, you want to have your waste collected, you have to pay. If you don't pay or you don't collect, or what you see in Albania very much is you just throw it away, or you just burn it. Because when it's getting too much and too hot, and then here the tradition is to burn it. That leads of course also to quite terrible wildfires. Because why are the wildfires developing? Partly of course because the agriculture is not well maintained. Yeah? That's a big issue. Then of course what you do with a lot of agricultural waste, you illegally incinerate it and burn it. Or what is also the problem is that because you have no kind of decent system in place, and then you basically see it's very dirty and the waste is piling up and it's stinking, and then they burn it in the containers. And that's of course then leads also to wildfires. Okay, that's maybe an excuse, but that's also one of the reasons why we have so many wildfires it's also a problem in Greece and in Italy to many extents, because they don't have this kind of sophisticated property related service charges and the enforcement behind it. What means the enforcement? The enforcement is when you don't pay your property related service charges, then it is ultimately registered against your balance sheet in your land register. So in Austria everybody has to pay that, otherwise he loses over time, and there is some mechanism, not automatically, you don't pay one fee and then you lose your property. No, it's not like that. It's the property is worth 200,000, you don't pay your monthly fees, it accumulates, and the courts can then after some time make whatever, send you first the small execution, but ultimately when you don't pay for years, also bigger execution. So the system works. The property related services like wastewater, canalization, and also then the whole system of outside cleanliness, the care for the pavement, everything has a regulation, a price attached, and a secure payment system. And then the owners are also, you know, okay, I have this 2,000 meters, it's my land, I have to take care, and it's mine, I pay for it, and if I don't do what is appropriate and what is meant, and if I don't pay, then it's in danger. This is of course a concept which many Albanians would think is really terrible to implement. But the difference is that then every land has a value. You don't leave it just because it costs something. There's a property tax to be paid, etc., etc. And there is property related services to be paid, and for sure to be paid. Like also electricity, water and all these things. And this property payment, property related service cycle, including the waste and also all other issues concerning from insurance to whatever the property taxes, are also leading then that the municipality have enough money, etc., etc. And so you see that this is really working very well. And that's why in Germany and Austria, when everybody comes, I see in the beginning it's a bit of shock that even if they own something they have to pay, but then they say always, it's so clean, it's so clean, everything works. Yeah, why? Because everybody pays. And why everybody pays? Not because we in particular like to pay our taxes or our service fees. Nobody likes that in the world, yeah. But we simply have no alternative because it's legally binding and it's secured with the property rights. And so the whole system of Austrian, I know most the Austrian system, but the whole system really works. And then the infrastructure works, and then the waste collection works, then the water services work, the wastewater collection works, and the energy works, and everything works basically. Everything what you normally call a normal kind of utilities and property related services. And this is the most important thing also for Albania to happen, because then the infrastructure in between these beautiful islands of prosperity in Tirana and at the coast in Durrës, they also work then. And it creates a lot of jobs, not only in house administration, but it creates a lot of jobs also to do the whole maintenance, and it also creates a lot of value. Because, for example, my apartment in Vienna was significantly increasing in value in the last 12, 13 years, while in Tirana, not so much. Yeah? While Tirana should have been much more going up, but you know, the value increase is connected to the property payment circle and the maintenance system, because then there is also a fund for long-term maintenance. Then the outside of houses looks really nice because it's regularly maintained, because there is funding for that. You don't need to have the consent of all the co-owners to do. Now you need still to have the consent, but you know, as there is the payment regularly, it's easier to find the consent because it's paid already. So they want to have something for their money as well. In this country, in Albania, because nobody pays regularly, then to make any repairs is of course very complicated. Because why should I do that when the others don't do that? And why should I pay for the roof, for the outside color, for the watering of outside, and so on and so on. And in this mess we are to this day, because the property rights have not been conclusively handled, and that is, I would like to conclude, also not so complicated to do. You can do it very easy with these blockchain cadastre systems today, with the will for transparency, and then you have all these magic things attached to it, which I have already outlined, like the property market as a sister. The financial market is working much better because it can grow together with the property market. Investments go more into the property market, and that's really very good, and so on and so on. So that's basically why I call for a European cadastre for Albania, and why it's so important to also for agriculture. This is the mountains of Albania. We are now going to Gruja, and that's the castle of Skanderbeu, and you will see some of the landscapes I will show you on the way. And that's very good for infrastructure, for residential, for tourism, for cleanliness, for water. I promised you about water, because also water is so important. The water rights to be discussed, clarity in the ownership leads also clarity in water rights. Wastewater collection, also very important for tourism, that you don't swim in what was prior in your body in Durrës. That's really very important, and so on and so on. So it's all about property rights in the land, and this is the tragedy of Albania, that to this moment it is not regulated. It was promised very much in 2005, it was promised very much in 2013 as the two major transition. Now it's hopefully really the time to get this conclusively done, exactly in this Austrian style of things, and then the whole property related circle and positive enforcing kind of miracle or helix of economic development can really accelerate and lift Albania to completely new levels of prosperity. Somewhere there is the Skanderbeg castle. That's how he defended it, and he would be very happy to have clarity in ownership after all these years. This is some of the companies. Construction material is a big business in Albania and will be for the future as well, and that will be also funding the economic development circle in the future. Here one of the energy lines. We have this typical traffic jam because there is not a lot of infrastructure built, and still there is, for example, no full ring road of Tirana, because normally we should be now at the Tirana motorway ring road, but we are not. And you know, when somebody knows the history of that one, it would have been so easy to build the Tirana ring road and it would have been so good, but there is no western ring road. There is now an inner ring road in the city, half ready. That's big progress, but a western ring road from the north, from Fumane towards Rogašinje, that would be such a European standard. But they don't have the property rights, they don't have the will, but something like that would have been so easy to do, and it would be so beneficial for the whole country. Imagine what kind of lost time we could be recovered when there would be a half moon kind of half ring road, motorway ring road, real European motorway ring road from the north of the city towards then bypassing Durrës obviously, and not at the coast directly but inside, and then connecting the various infrastructure lines from Elbasan. From Elbasan basically, where in the south of the city could be built easily, south of the industrial area, and then ring road towards a half moon ring road towards the north. That would be so amazing, but it's not to be. There's a lack of wisdom and vision, and to this day Albania has not a single meter of really European style motorway, and that says also everything about property rights, about the European standards in this country, because Kosovo did it from the beginning European, and here they have done it from the start in this kind of messy improvisation level, because from the start everything was done a bit without standards and just somehow, and not really. And that's the big problem in the property cycle, that's in the infrastructure, that's in land rights, and it's ultimately all connected to this dodgy transition Albania has been going through, and the lack of real help from the European side, sending money but not really caring so much, and then not being firm enough to impose European style catasters and to make sure there is complete transparency of ownership. Let me also talk about transparency for ownership, because that's also hugely beneficial in Macedonia and Montenegro, two much more advanced countries already, also in NATO luckily, like Albania is already. But obviously what is so important is that they have complete transparency in the land register. They really can do that, and this was really amazingly beneficial for these countries, and this is really the reason why they move much better, and they have also more investments from foreign countries, and also they are more advanced because they had this clarity from day one, and here unfortunately this was missing, and so we are a bit in the mess. We are a bit stuck in this transition, and it would be rather easy to do it. And that has also for the whole society a huge effect when there's transparency. Every single owner, land plot, every single apartment should be owned and visible in the internet, in the Cadastre online, for everybody to see which politician has which land, which apartment. And this is of course in Germany, they don't like it with data privacy, but it should be complete transparency in order to make to clean the society and the economy. It should be very clear who has what and why he has it. Then should be asked from the tax and from the customs and from the central bank. That's quite easy to clean up a country with this tool, is perfectly doable. And that's also the reason why there was no consensus to release this data to the public, because the elite doesn't want people to know, and the journalists obviously, who owns what, and then ask the question why. So that's basically so important, this kind of circle and this kind of coordination between the cadastre, the tax office and the central bank. Then you can crack down on drug-related money laundering. You can clean up the whole use of dirty money from the politics, stealing from tenders or whatever kind of procurement schemes, and then to basically put this cash money into property related into property in somebody else's names or in your own name, and you just don't register it. Or it's very often also in many other cases that it's this kind of manipulation of data would be easily to be found out once it's in the public. You know exactly where is your neighboring plot, you know who should be registered. It's another name, why is that? Or in a new apartment block you can easily screen the list of owners, and then you know. And so that's also for the authorities much easier. And then the authorities can also access and can say, why we have here suddenly 15 times that person as an owner, or that company, who owns that company, why is it? And so this is the way to do things. And so you clean up the economy and the society, and you make it ready for Europe. And it's a very easy and simple process. And the reason why for 8 years it was not done is because of all the related benefits when you don't do it. The benefits for the very few on the top, who you ultimately have to rely on, because when you cannot rely on the court-backed cadastre data, you have to be sure that you are basically either defend your land yourself with arms, that happened also a lot here, or you make sure that you have political connections where you can be sure that you have, in case of anybody questioning the ownership rights, that you just call the Prime Minister and he orders that to be left alone or not. So you have to be politically compliant in order to be wealthy. And that's what we did for hundreds of years in Europe. It was not working very well. Now we have advanced and have European property rights, very much better so. And in Albania it's just 90% of the way, maybe just 75%. And this is the ultimate reason why it's not so clean. This is the ultimate reason why we have so much corruption. That's the ultimate reason why we have so little investment, and so on. It's basically connected to the lack of European accuracy and transparency in a European style asset register for land, apartments and the related rights and costs. This is something which is quite clear. This is what easily could be changed, and I call for changing that now. I think there's no better way than to do it now, and please, let's get it done. Thanks a lot for this. More to come from this beautiful, soon to be cleaned country, politically and also physically, by European cadastre and related services database. Thanks a lot. Bye. Oh Samir. Schön drauf. Oh Samir.